In the last 5 years or so, film's been on a bit of a rebound compared to like the dark days of the mid-2000s when film companies were closing down or discontinuing a lot of their more popular films. In the last few years, as films become more popular again, we've seen some discontinued films actually brought back. Films like Kodak's T-Max P3200. What we haven't seen a lot of is new colour films, apart from Lomography's Metropolis film, which I'll cover in a video at a later date. But in February of this year, there was a bit of a surprise, and it was this. Adox's Color Mission film. If you don't know who Adox is, it's the oldest film producer in the world. It's been making film and photochemical products since 1860. That's before Ilford's, before Kodak. And they've really made a name for themselves in making very high quality black and white films. Films such as HR50, which is a really, really beautiful film. And they're sort of kind of a boutique producer, making films at a smaller scale, based in Germany, and partnered with the Photo Impact store in Berlin. They haven't released a lot of colour films in recent years. They released one in the 2000s called Colour Implosion, which was a really weird looking colour print film with very sort of distorted colours. It looked like old expired slide film that had been cross-processed, but it wasn't around for very long. In February they announced Color Mission, which they said was a film they'd been working on for a few years, and it was something that they were still tweaking, but that they wanted to bring out a first batch of it and continue working on it over the next couple of years, in the hope that they would be able to release a final product, which is quite an interesting way to go about things. Often this kind of stuff is done behind closed doors with a lot of money being spent before the general public or bloggers like myself get any wind of it. But it seems like quite an interesting trend. I know that Film Forania did something similar with their P30 black and white film, where they brought out an alpha version to see what the initial feedback was before they tweaked the recipe. And it seems like a similar thing might happen with Color Mission as well. So unfortunately, I missed out on getting hold of Adox Color Mission, but a really nice photographer in the UK, Alan Stockdale-Mander, thanks Alan, he actually offered me 3 rolls at the price he bought them at. So I was able to actually get my hands on some and pop them in my cameras. I put my first roll in this camera, which is a Fed Micron 2 rangefinder. It's a really nice little rangefinder camera, quite compact, even though it's quite heavy. It's really nice for street shooting because it has an automatic setting where you just pop the camera on there and it will work out the aperture and the shutter speed for you. So I waited until a sunny day that I had off, and I wandered into the centre of London to try out the first roll of Adox Color Mission. So the second roll I put in this camera, which is an Olympus OM4 Ti. It's a really, really nice high-end Olympus OM camera from the 1980s. It's actually kept in production until the early 2000s because a lot of pro photographers absolutely loved it. And I can see why. I've only had the camera for a few months, but I'm really taken with it. So I thought I'd get some sort of sunny day street photography shots, a bit of sort of local colour, hustle and bustle for the markets. So for my final roll, I decided to take it on holiday. I was going away with my wife in April to the west of Wales. And I took along this really lovely camera. It's a Zeiss Icon SL706. It's a fairly little known West German camera from the early 1970s with absolutely beautiful lenses. And I waited until there was a day with some nice sun. It had been pretty rainy for a few days. Put in the final roll, and you can have a look at the results here. Adox are keeping pretty tight-lipped about this film's beginnings, but I've made a few sort of educated guesses based on shooting 3 rolls and also seeing examples sort of posted online. Adox Color Mission feels to me like one of the Agfa color films from the 90s and 2000s. In particular, the original Agfa Vista 200. You shouldn't mistake this for the film that you used to be able to get at Poundland for a pound back in 2010 or so, the glory days when you could get a roll of film for a pound. That was actually a repackaged Fujifilm, probably C200 or Superior 200. The original Agfa Vista 200 was part of Agfa's Vista stable of consumer films. So the Vista range was sort of Agfa's equivalent of Kodak's consumer films, like Gold 200 or Ultramax 400. Agfa stopped making film around 2005, and so most of their film sort of disappeared around that time, which is a real shame because it had a really wonderful warm colour palette, similar to but slightly different to what you see with Kodak's consumer films. I've been trying to track down the original Agfa Vista films all the time, even going to like eBay Germany to see if I can find like expired stock, because there's just something about that colour palette. And I was really reminded of that with shooting this film. Now, I'm not saying that what they're making is Agfa Vista 200, but I am saying it definitely feels like it might be related. Obviously, the only people who really know this are Adox, and perhaps they'll shed a bit more light on how this film came about when it gets a bit nearer to a proper release. At the moment, you can't find the film unless you're lucky enough to find somebody selling rolls on eBay, because the initial batch, as I said earlier, it sold out really quickly. However, more batches of the film are being made. Speaking to Mirko, who runs Adox, a few months ago, they were quite surprised at how popular the film was. So I think they're going to stretch out the batches a little until the finished film is finally ready. But I get the sense that later on this summer there will be more film available. I think it's an absolutely perfect film for summer. 200 ISO gives you a little more leeway if you're shooting street compared to 100 ISO, but it's still sort of nicely fine-grained, not super fine-grained. The reason why I mention Agfa Vista 200 is that had a little more grain than the Optima 200 film, which was Agfa's sort of pro-level colour negative film. Atmospheric without being too in your face. Wonderful colour palette, beautiful scans. I had these scans by Bayer, which is a really good lab in the centre of London. And when I got the first roll from this little Fed Micron, I remember opening up the Dropbox folder and just seeing these eye-popping colours, which were just absolutely fantastic. So my hope is that everything goes well for Adox and they're able to bring this film out as a proper release in the years to come, because it's always great to have more colour films. I think anyone who's shooting film at the moment understands that the real issue is the availability of colour film. Kodak can't seem to make it in enough quantities to keep all retailers and all shooters happy, because whenever the shops I know in London are getting colour film, it's pretty much gone within 24 hours. I think the upsurge in interest, especially since the start of the COVID pandemic, has really surprised film manufacturers, and I don't think they're yet at a stage where they can fully supply that market. So to have a new player like Adox in terms of like consumer colour film is absolutely fantastic. This is not going to be a cheap film. It's certainly not going to be like the consumer films that we used to enjoy in the past, where you'd walk into a pharmacy or a photo shop and be able to get it for £4. I believe this was €12 a roll when it was released, and I would imagine it's going to stay around that price point from here on in. But considering that there's an enormous amount of work that's gone on to just get the film to the stage where they were happy to release a trial version for photographers to try, that's a huge undertaking compared to releasing a new black and white film. You're talking anywhere between, I would say, 5 to 10 times the development cost. So instead of a few €100,000 or a few £100,000, you're looking at well over $1 million, I would imagine. And that's part of the reason why it is such an undertaking for film producers. Until recently, there wasn't that market resurgence that made people want to take the bet on an entirely new film. If Adox Color Mission is successful, which fingers crossed it is, I think that's not only good for the people who missed that AGFA look, like myself, but it's also a really nice pointer to things that can be done in the future. If Fujifilm, if Kodak, if some of the other players, fingers crossed too for Film Forania, their plans, if they want to release colour films, then I think Adox has shown a really interesting way of doing it, which is involving the community, the film shooters around the world, and the retailers who stock film. A different way of doing things, getting involved with sort of early trial versions of an emulsion before they've really worked out what the finalized version of it is. I think that's actually a really nice thing to do. Lomography did similar with their Metropolis film. The first batch of that was very different in look to the second, which came out, I think, either last year or earlier this year. It makes life interesting for us, especially those of us who want to try new emulsions. And it also just, I think, gives a feeling of involvement with the film shooting community. It's not just a company deciding, oh, we're going to do this in secret and then announce it like any other product. There seems a little more interaction and involvement. So I'm sad that I've shot my last roll of Adox Color Mission for now, because I would love to be shooting it in sunny summer days in London, especially in Greenwich Park with all those wonderful greens and colours of the flowers. But I'm absolutely stoked with the results I got, and I will definitely be getting more when the next batch is released.